Okay.
I am Cheryl Sucher, and I created this series Between Two Worlds because I live between New Jersey and New Zealand. And I've been interviewing authors after I had a talk show in New Zealand, because when you're a Jewish New Yorker in New Zealand, it's like you're a Samoan princess. They think you're really something amazingly special. I've been a huge fan of Shalom's from the very beginning, and I'm going to start by telling you I have a friend named Marty Friedlander who passed away, a very famous photographer in New Zealand. And she read your story in the New Yorker, and she said to me, he's the best author I've ever read in my entire life. And she was a really gnarly person. So I don't know if she said that to me, because she wanted to irritate me, but she also sincerely believed it. And so your voice has reached across to the ends of the earth. And I heard early on about this book, Mother for Dinner, about cannibal Americans. And I thought, oh, I have to talk to Shalom about this. So he's going to read from the beginning, and then we'll talk about his life and his work and what it's like to publish during a wonderful pandemic.
It's awesome. Wouldn't happen any other way. Okay, so I'm going to start. The book starts with a photo, an archival photo, which we can discuss a little bit. It's of Americanization Day, which took place at the Ford factory in Detroit on 1917. And it's essentially a big fake plywood melting pot with immigrants going in one end and coming out the other, and thereby becoming Americanized. It's a true story. I wish I'd made it up, but it's true. Book starts with two quotes. The first is from a poem from Constantine Cavafy. Without reflection, without sorrow, without shame, they built around me great high walls, and I sit here now and despair. The other is an old cannibal American joke. Two cannibals sit beside a campfire. I really hate my mother, says one. Says the other, then just eat the rice. Okay, chapter 1, so to speak. Mothers taste awful. They're revolting head to toe. The head is the worst part. No amount of seasoning will change that. Ask anyone who's consumed one. You can broil them, you can sous vide them, you can dehydrate them and turn them into jerky. It won't help. Even their smell is awful. Toss one on the grill and you'll think someone has been burning car tires, which, with a bit of aioli, would probably taste better than mothers. It's not a gender thing. Don't get excited. Women in general taste no worse than men, and they often taste better. Much depends on the preparation, of course, but men tend to live sedentary lives, which gives them a smoky flavor that's not to everyone's liking. Women, on the other hand, tend to be more active and live longer, their meat more lean, their flavor more subtle. But mothers, specifically women who have borne a child, are a very different story. Mothers tend to live longer, which leaves them gamey and dry, their years seasoned with disappointments and heartbreak. Their deaths often precipitated by long terms of confinement to bed, which stiffens the muscles and joints. As they said in the old country, when a dead mother beckons, no one wants seconds. Not that fathers taste good, mind you, but men on average die younger and often suddenly. They're no Peter Luger, but they beat the hell out of mothers. What about mothers who die young, you wonder? Do they taste good? Yes, they do. They're delicious. It's a terrible irony of which only the ancient cannibal people are aware. The younger the deceased, the sweeter the meat. The sweeter the meat, the more bitter the heartache. Seventh Seltzer was at work in his office, high above Manhattan's bustling Soho district, wondering how many Burger King Whoppers, double bacon, extra cheese, no lettuce, his mother could eat before she dropped dead. She'd been eating them for years now, often as many as 12 a day, every day, trying, as was the tradition, to fatten herself up for death. 100, he wondered? 1,000? Tops. No way she could eat more than 1,000 Whoppers, he thought. He was way off. It was morning, but outside his office window, the sky above the Hudson River was already turning the dull, oxidized gray of slaughtered meat left out too long. An early winter snow was approaching, catching the city off guard, but Seventh had too much work to worry about it. His desk was buried beneath a mountain of unread manuscripts. Seventh rejected every manuscript he read. It wasn't their predictability. He was in publishing, after all. He was used to predictability. It was part of a larger problem with which he had struggled his entire life: identity, the I word. For Seventh, identity had always been a prison he longed to escape. White, black, brown, American, European, Russian, male, female, straight, gay, they, them, atheist, monotheist, polytheist, the ever-growing list of cell blocks from which there was no release. And yet lately, all around him, the prisoners were proudly raising their shackles overhead and cheering their own bondage. Seventh worked on the 8th floor of his office building, and if he was certain the impact of his skull with the sidewalk would kill him, he would have jumped 20 identity-obsessed novels ago. He hadn't bought a new manuscript in months, and Rosenblum had been in to see him about it that morning. But they're terrible, he said to Rosenblum. All of them, Rosenblum asked. Yes, all of them. Well, we have to publish something. Why? Asked Seventh. Because we're publishers, said Rosenblum. That's unfortunate, said Seventh. What'd you think about that Croatian-American one? Rosenblum asked. I thought that showed promise. Which Croatian-American one? The pro-choice lesbian Croatian-American one. Seventh shrugged. It was no different from the heroin-addicted autistic Christian-American one, he said. The heroin-addicted autistic Christian-American hemophiliac one, you mean? Rosenblum asked. No, said Seventh. The heroin-addicted autistic Christian-American diabetic one. The type 2 one, asked Rosenblum, or the type 1 one? Both, said Seventh. Rosenblum sighed. We're a tribal creature, Seventh, he said. Division is the way of man and woman. It's in our blood. Have you ever looked at a map of human migration? We began in Africa as one and got the hell out as soon as we could, braving storms, oceans, beasts, famine. Why? Wanderlust? To see Paris in the springtime? No, because we couldn't stomach each other. Not for 1 minute more minute. Hell is other people. Sartre said that, but early man would have said it sooner if he had developed language. Or she. Someday, Seventh Seltzer, mark my words, everyone will have a nation of their own. Not every people, every person. It's the only way he'll be satisfied. Or she. 1 foot by 1 foot squares, evenly divided all around the globe, surrounded by walls 10 feet high, topped with razor wire and colorful flags, everyone in their own square singing rousing marches about how their square is number one, how God chose their square above all other squares, how this square foot is their square foot, and God help the person who tries to take it from them. We're obsessed with our squares, with our people, with our pasts. That's why mankind has no future, or womankind. That's the bad news. What's the good news? It's a growing market, said Rosenblum. He picked up a manuscript from Seltzer's desk. Is this the one about the blind alcoholic Latinx Sri Lankan American, he asked. Yes, said Seventh, but it read just like the one about the gender-neutral albino Lebanese Eritrean American. Just find something, Rosenblum demanded, tossing the manuscript on his desk before stomping out the door. And then Seventh's phone rang. He glanced down and saw the familiar name on the screen, Mud, the name he and his siblings called their mother. Mud said that when First was a baby, he couldn't pronounce the word mother and it came out as mud. Bullshit, First said. If I had named her, he insisted, it would have been something a hell of a lot worse than mud. Seventh agreed with First. Third agreed with Mud, but Third always agreed with Mud. Fourth, the smartest of the bunch, stayed out of it, declaring simply that a myth becomes truth if enough people believe it. First despised Mud. Only Second hated her as much, and the names he called her were indeed worse than Mud. He was the first to be born and the first, 18 years later, to leave. Don't answer the phone, Seventh thought. He answered the phone. Fuck. Hello, Mud, he said. There was a long pause before she whispered weakly, It's time. Time for what, Mud, he asked. You know what, she said. Your sister's here. So are your brothers. First is there? Seventh asked. Yes. First is there, in your home. He's downstairs, she said, with the others. Which others? Everyone, she said. It's time, Seventh. Will you come? Say no, thought Seventh. Yes, he said. Fuck. And so Seventh Seltzer put down the memoir of a paraplegic pescatarian Presbyterian conjoined Filipinx Arab American and headed for Brooklyn. There you go.
So Shalom, in that first scene, you excoriate mothers, family, and the publishing industry. So you worked in advertising in the state in New York, didn't you, or
Yes,
public?
a
Because
long
I
time.
once sold books at a party they gave you for McNally Jackson or Force
Oh,
Kinsman. So that's how I know.
right,
And
yeah.
you've recently moved to the new cult of Los Angeles, no?
Yes, because I'm a schmuck.
With your family. But there's a lot of things I want to ask about, but I was listening to your podcast that you did with Meyer Kay, who also I think is sort of left from, he's not from Monsey, he came from Chabad, which is a whole other note, of Jewish crazy.
Right.
And but at first, the first I'll say, this is where I wanted to begin. He asked you this question, do you have Jewish guilt? And when he asked that, I laughed so hard, my husband came running up the stairs. Because I said, I don't even know a person who maybe has like an inch of Jewish blood who doesn't have any kind of Jewish guilt. And then you paused and you said, well, you're a human being. We all have guilt. And it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or you're not, that you were very close to Philip Seymour Hoffman and you had guilt about that. He had Catholic guilt, Italian guilt. But you started talking about this book. And that's where I wanted to begin. And you said, I'm trying to push back against these things that we knowingly use to divide ourselves or to inadvertently pat ourselves on the back for, and then inadvertently divide ourselves, which
Right.
goes in a way to what you began the novel with. It's basically this character trying to extricate himself from mud and the world that she represents of cannibals, American, which could be Mormons, it could be Jews. I mean, the way that you created it is such that anybody could really identify it, but somehow remain in his own world. So
Right.
the question I wanted to ask you is, where did the idea come from? And
Right.
it's such a good joke. It's like a Saturday Night Live scene. Like, how did it take, what did you do to take that idea and stretch it out into a novel?
Right. So so the first I'll say the general idea for me was I was in my early 40s at the time. I'm estranged from my family. But that's the age where your friends' parents start dying. And so in my head, I was wondering what I would do if I suddenly got a call in the middle of the night saying, your mother's dead, and they hang up. And I don't know who would deliver that call or how they would get my number, but what would I do? Would I go? Would I go to the funeral? And part of what is great about fiction or thinly veiled nonfiction is that, you get to create a character like yourself who's struggling with the things you're struggling with and see what they would do, either screwing up or doing the right thing or just asking questions. And so that's where it initially came from. And then that combined with look, I was, so I was raised and born Jewish, and it has been this thing that I've struggled to both get away from and find out where I'm going to, right? So I remember a moment in my life that was very, unfortunately, metaphoric for the way the rest of my life would be. But I was in yeshiva high school in Manhattan, and a friend of mine and I cut school and went down to Madison Square Garden to watch a monster truck show. And, first thing we do is take our yarmulkes off, put them in our pockets, smoke cigarettes, because why not? And then we go to Madison Square Garden. I remember sitting there and thinking, oh, this is great. I'm out. I made it. I can escape. There's hope. And then it's just, you look around and it's packed with people. And the MC comes to the center and it's all filled with dirt and there's monster trucks there. And the MC comes out and he says, all right, let's hear it from all you Chevy fans. And half the garden starts screaming. And then he goes, all right, let's hear it from all you Ford fans. And the other side starts screaming. And I was like, I've made a huge mistake. It was sort of like, okay, so these are my options, either suffocation or meaninglessness. That's what I'm trapped between, utter, like, just crushing me, or stupidity. And that's been the whole thing. And the older I get, the more I start to realize that those boundaries, those divisions, while we say we like them or we're proud of them or we're proud of you for having them, and we admire all our wonderful diversity, in my life, it's just made it more difficult to meet people, to know people. It hasn't helped. Walking around with that long hyphenate on my shirt isn't going to have someone across the street say, hey, I know you, or let's hang out. It's points of difference, not points of similarity. And so in a weird way, I came to this just sort of as an adult, this feeling of like, well, maybe as I read from the book with seven sight feeling is that why is everyone running around with their shackles raised overhead saying, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a this, I'm a that, when none of that matters. What matters is that we're human beings. And that's what matters first and foremost. And a lot of my literary heroes or my comedy heroes were always talking about that.
Like who?
Dick Gregory or Richard Pryor or Bill Hicks or George Carlin in the comedy world. I found Beckett was at some level talking about that, at least in terms of we're all here and none of us know why. So we might as well just hang ourselves. Kafka certainly was just trying to get at what it meant to be him, which is why it's so irritating to me when it's like when there are books out about, oh no, he was a Jew, or our Kafka, or the Jewish Kafka. But not, to me, it felt like and again, we see what we want to see when we read these things, when we hear these things. But to me, everything seemed to point, a lot of the things I found myself gravitating toward were things that were espousing similar views of, there's a point in the book where Zero, who's the daughter, and she's named there's 12 brothers and sisters. They're all brothers, actually. She was named Zero because she's a girl, and the mother feels like she doesn't count because they're patrilineal. But she points out that that all creatures, and this is a thing I read years ago, and I remember like printing it, bookmarking it, saving it, because I knew I wanted to use it somewhere, because it seemed like such truth to me, that all organisms, whatever we are, start as either an anus first or a mouth first. And first, it's interesting that it's not brain first, no matter what we look at, it's not brain.
Well, you're talking about the blastula, and the zygote, right? We're talking really the beginning.
Really, step one.
Yeah, before the heart, exactly.
Before the heart, before the soul, before the brain,
anything.
or anything. And humans are asshole first. And to me, that was like, yes, first of all, of course we are, because we're also asshole last. But even what a great way to look at us and just say, you know what, I don't have the same kind of humanism that Vonnegut had. Like, I have a hard time looking at people and saying, aren't we all great? But I can see a way of joining together by saying, we're all just assholes. We're not any better than anybody else. We all kind of came from assholes. We're making the best we can of it. Some do better than others, but maybe that's a way we can all sort of rally around some kind of flag of humanity and stop with all the division, because that's the thing that was my prison.
Was division. So why cannibals?
So I don't know. Cannibals was like, it's funny because you said it sounds like a joke, and Milan Kundera writes about Kafka in this way. And what he says is that what Kafka did in all his writing, and Kafka was like the first writer I really read, first or second. And so
were you allowed to read in yeshiva Western works? Did you go to a modern yeshiva or a really old-fashioned?
I mean, they forced Hamlet down your throat once in 4 years. But I used to go to bookstores in Manhattan, and after I was done at the porno shops, and found him. I happened to babysit for a family with that name in Muncie, and I thought, oh, that's funny. So I bought Metamorphosis, and I was like, wow, this is hilarious. But basically, what Kundera talks about is that what Kafka did, and others, but Kafka in the main, was that he goes into what he calls the dark depths of the joke. So it starts, a guy wakes up and he's a bug. And yeah, you're on SNL, right? Or a guy wakes up and there's two guys in front of him and they're arresting him and they're eating his breakfast. And they
Mm-hmm.
won't tell him why they arrested him. And it's all very funny. And there's apocryphal stories of Kafka in a bar with his friends reading the first chapter of the trial and laughing himself silly. And they're all thinking, he's off his meds. But he found it very funny, and it is funny. But what happens in chapter 2 is he stays with it. He starts taking that joke very seriously. And what happens if we pursue that joke? If a guy slips and falls on a banana peel and we laugh, okay, but now turns out he's a war hero and he's just broken his back and it's your sidewalk and now he's taking you to court and they're telling, and like just to see what happens when the joke continues. And that's really spoke to me because that's kind of, to me, that's not a literary thing. That's just life. Life's just a joke that keeps on going, right? You're
Right.
not anywhere and then you're here and deal with it. And now you got to now you got to get food and you got to get water and you got to get shelter. And you've got this ridiculous brain that's way oversized for any creature that knows it's going to die. And you can either sit there and mourn, or you can go, you know what? I think that's a pretty funny joke. Let's just see what happens. That's life. Here's a joke. Voltaire once said, God is a comedian telling jokes to a room full of people who are too afraid to laugh. And that may be right. He may be also just that he's an asshole and not funny at all and just a dick. And that's also a possibility. But if you got to pick one, I go with the first one. And so that's the fun part to me, is to make myself laugh and then go, okay, now give these characters some real depth and some heart and see what happens.
I have to say that at different points of reading the book, I wish I had taken a Dramamine, because the explanation of, the evisceration of the body, you don't shy away from anything.
Oh,
and I think that's what makes you who you are,
No,
and all I kept on thinking about was like, my parents were Holocaust survivors. So they had they didn't hold my heart. Their hands were coming out of the grave. I was in therapy also for 25 years. Right. But as I was older and I learned Hebrew because I wanted to go to the army in Israel because they seemed freer than, Holocaust survivors hiding in the house. I started reading Torah, and the Torah is filled with all these rituals, do you know what I mean? Of like killing, right? Yeah. And then I think about Yom Kippur, which you talked about in your podcast, where they swing the chickens over their heads.
Yeah.
So these animals are constantly slaughtered. And so when I was reading your book, I was thinking, there's really this biblical, whether it's in the back of your head from those years in yeshiva, of like, this unbelievable amount of laws that you have to learn, which have absolutely no relevance to modern culture.
Right.
And, this is the chain that is holding seventh that he's trying to break away from.
Right.
So
and
there are a lot of metaphors there.
And the big irony with them is that they can't, because their traditions are felonies, they can't write them down. So it's all oral law. So no one remembers what they're supposed to do. To me, like, two of the defining moments in writing it were when the idea of Remembrance Day came up, which is the most holy day in cannibal history. But because they're so secretive, no one has any idea what it's commemorating, when they're supposed to do it, how they're supposed to do it. They know something bad happened, but they don't know who did it to them or why or when. But they all observe it, but none of them can agree on when, so they all observe it on different days of the year. So it's absolutely meaningless.
Which is like when you ask rabbis or anything to answer questions, if you have any logical questions, that's always their answer, right? It's like they don't answer the question, they ask it with another question, or this is the way it's always been done, so that's why we do it.
Yeah. And then the second one for me was kind of going into Mud's mind and going, okay, well, let's see from, a devout or a loving, proud cannibal woman, what's her feeling about American culture? And I don't know why, but I started to think about her watching Gilligan's Island. And, they have headhunters there and they've got bones in their noses and face paint and hula skirts. And I could see her looking at that going, how dare those Jews in Hollywood? They can say whatever they want about us. They're representing us like we're idiots. And then starting to let her kind of talk and say, And she brings up a good point. At a certain point, I was kind of like surprised because she said, wait, I understand. They call us savages for eating our beloved. They dig holes in the dirt, drop the bodies inside, let them get eaten by worms and maggots, and we're the savages. And it started to kind of like, oh, wait, maybe there's a whole mythology here that I can play with. Maybe there's a whole history that I can invent. And that's always the really fun part.
The origin story that you created was based on the Henry Ford and the ancestor who comes over and is told that, that he can work for $5 an hour.
Yeah.
Was that something that you found during the writing of the book, or was that sort of inspired by something else?
No, I was doing a lot of research. The books always go through, it's deceptive because they're funny and it feels like they just come out, but they always go, on average, they're 5 years to write, and there's 80 versions before it. And I had to kind of write out the entire history of these people, of a people that didn't even know themselves where they came from. The only thing I could start at was Ellis Island. And immediately you start finding, in a great way, that no one knows what the fuck they're talking about. So I was told that, the guards and the immigration people at Ellis Island were Nazis and anti-Semites. And so when Mr. Goldenschweig came in, they said, no, we're calling you Mr. Gold, and stamped the paper and to help get rid of Jews. So first of all, I don't know how that's going to help get rid of Jews. That's just going to help them get jobs. But the interesting thing to me was that when I researched it, it's a complete myth. Nobody on this side of the water was even remotely involved in names or forms. That happened on the other side. Mm-hmm. So where they came from. So either the Nazis are there, since we know they're everywhere, or, I hate to tell you, but your great-grandfather coming to America wanted to belong here and he changed his fucking name, and you guys are pretending it was somebody else. Mm-hmm. And it's like that whole thing where you just don't know, and we've created all these stories. I started to read this fantastic book called The Lies That Bind, by this guy, Anthony Appiah, and there's other books about this, but he just takes apart this entire illusion of race and nationality, and we say we're from here, but that place wasn't even there when we were, and it just dissects the whole thing. And it's a guy whose own country was diced and sliced by Europe into 100,000 countries that don't really exist. And so it just kind of, I started to go, well, this is a fun thing to write, this history nobody knows about. So when I got to the basic story of a lot of immigrants was, you come into America in New York, you can't make it because no one's paying you anything. And around that time, everyone heard, oh, Henry Ford's paying $5 a day, just so go out to Detroit. And a lot of them did. But so many did that he changed the rules. And he said, you have to get $5 a day, you have to be Americanized. And it was a sort of humiliating process, because these guys, like, you have this now, like you get into an Uber or a taxi, and it's a guy from Bangladesh who is an architect there, or a surgeon, but they can't transfer their credentials here. So now he's driving a car. And so a similar thing happened, right? So they would have, basically the event was, and I was reading this through 2019 eyes, an American, saying, what a horror, right? Because the ceremony was ludicrous in a way that only reality can be. So basically at the end of the training course, you'd invite your friends and family, and they'd all sit down, and at the front of by the stage, there's a big piece of plywood in the shape of a pot, like 30 feet wide, 20 feet high, painted black, and it says the melting pot. And everybody who is in the ceremony dresses up cartoonishly in the clothing of the country they came from, which doesn't mean anything because half the people wore the same thing they did here. But I always picture them running out to costume places like here in Hollywood, because who the hell had lederhosen or anything like that? But that's what, if you were from Germany, that's what you had to wear. And they would dress up in this clothing like idiots, walk up a ladder that made it look like they were going down into one side of the pot. When they were behind the plywood, There would be somebody there from the Ford factory. They'd take their clothes off. Underneath, they're wearing an American suit and tie, and they hand them an American flag. And then they climb up the other side of the pot and come out the melting pot, and they're Americanized, right? And you're just like, holy shit, that's insane. How that is just, I mean, I know he was, a Nazi, but that's just ridiculous. And so I started to think about that though, and reading Apia's book and reading some other stuff, I started going, wait, surely for some of those people, that was a horrendous moment. But equally so, for some of them, it must have been a tremendous accomplishment. It was a dream come true. They're coming from places where they're being murdered or starvation, and they've made it. They've made it. First of all, they made it on the boat. Second of all, they made it out to Michigan. No one wants to go to Michigan. And then they're there, and then they finish the course and they become Americans. And yeah, okay, so it's a jackass ceremony. But we look at it and we've decided for all of them whether they should have done that or not. Whether from our perspective, that was a good thing or a bad thing. But there is no such thing. For some of them, it was horrendous. Henry Ford was a piece of shit. That's kind of the facts. Everything after that is up to those individuals to say whether it was great or not. You certainly look at the photos and some of them seem happy coming out of there. And so that was what kind of interested me, is that we base so much of who we are on where we came from and what our pasts are, and it's ghosts, it's myth, it's legend. So we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened in 2016 election, and we're going to decide that we know what happened in 1910,
Yeah.
1830 in Russia in the 1400s. We don't know shit. But it ends up, the past ends up being this, not just an anchor, but ends up being a weapon that we use against each other. And that just ends up, look, if you're just walking backwards through life and you keep repeating these things that you thought happened in the past, then we're just going to keep repeating them again. And at a certain point, you just have to say, you know what, fuck it.
But the irony is, and this is where you capture it, is that history is constantly being changed to be used by the people who need to keep other people in line. You know what I mean? It's like Trump, being the surprise person to give citizenship. He did that a couple of weeks ago.
No.
You didn't see that?
No, I don't want.
I mean, he's like the current Nazi.
Right.
And Henry Ford, the myth of these people, like, what do people think about Henry Ford? Do they, like you say in the book, he wasn't just a sympathizer of Nazi, he was an American Nazi.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
And but what do we see? We all drive Fords. And
right.
You go to this, motor truck, these monster truck rally, and it's Fords
Sure.
versus Chevy. So it's sort of this constant reinvention of the history for the use of the people to control other people. Which is one of the things I always think about religious cults. It's just like this president. They rule by authoritarian fear.
Right.
That's what you have to escape.
But there's two edges to that, because there's the right wing edge, which is let's turn everybody against each other, and then there's a left wing edge, and hey, I had a Bernie. I was left of Bernie.
Yeah.
And which is, let's all pat each other on the back for being diverse. And I look at it and I'm like, you know what? This is not a diversity issue. This is a class issue. This is a wealth issue, right? And the biggest clue to me is, look what corporations are doing. Corporations spend billions on diversity. They have diversity training, they have diversity offices, they have diversity lectures. That's how you know it's not making a goddamn difference. Because then when you ask them to raise minimum wage $1, they freak the fuck out.
That's right. That's right.
So that's where the problem's coming from. That's what the real battle is. And when we just sort of focus on, again, our differences and what draws us apart from each other, I understand the self-esteem needed for it, and I understand the anger behind some of it. But in a way, when you paint yourself that way, you're letting those people win. And that I can't do. So I'm at Madison Square Garden and I can either look around and go, what a bunch of jackasses. I'm going back home because at least it's not Jackassville, or vice versa. I'm going to stay here. And really, you got to pull an Abraham. You just got to wake up in the morning and go your own way and say, this is it. I don't have these. I'm friendly with this person. I'm friendly with all these people. I could give a shit. And I don't care who, I don't care about the Inquisition, and I don't care about what happened in Egypt 3,000 years ago. I just feel like, Zero again says this in the book, that, when you get your driver's license and you get in the car for your driving first lesson, the first thing the guy tells you is, don't drive in the rear view mirror or you'll crash. Stop looking in the back or you're going to hit the tree in front of you.
It's true.
Every kid crashes. and there's something to that about life. And she complains that her uncle, the man who's helping them to cook and eat their mother, is driving through life in the rearview mirror. And he is. And so do the people who gave birth to me, who taught me, who trained me, and who condemned me, because they're all looking in that mirror. And I can't. I have kids. I don't want them driving that way.
I know that Mark Kay asked you this, and he said, is there anything good that you have kept from your Jewish upbringing? And you said nothing.
Nothing.
Is that true? I mean, I think, what about comedy? One of the saving graces for me is my father would take me to the Catskills, and took me to the Yiddish theater, where Jewish humor was as excoriating and dark, and seemed to me very relevant to some of the stuff that you're doing.
Sure. But
so were you exposed to any of that?
But comedy isn't Jewish. Comedy is oppression and anger,
True.
Which is why African Americans are much funnier now than any Jews. They have reason to be. It's a survival mechanism, and it's a way to fight back. So it doesn't have anything to do with being Jewish. If there's anything that I like, it's that for a very small number of people, we've made a tremendous amount of trouble. I admire that.
Is there anything that you think is in bad taste in humor?
There's always that thing about what are you allowed to joke about? What aren't you allowed to joke about? I, for one, think if a racist wants to make a joke, let him, because I'd rather know where they are than have them not say it, but say it to their friends later. But the truth is, when you tell a joke, you know if there's hatred in it or not. I don't know. It's like that thing with porn and the judge, I know when I see it. You just know. And, Rickles got away with making fun of everybody because you just kind of knew he didn't mean it. Not because he was offending anybody, because you just kind of get, and then, you watch the docs on him and it's like, yeah, he was just a sweetheart, a great dad, a great grandfather, loved everybody, friendly with everybody. He was Archie bunkering. He was making fun of the people who actually believed it. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be really careful with that. I think it'd be nice. We're in the day, right now where we want rules and restrictions on everything, but you really can't, because to shut it down just helps it grow and thrive. And I think most of us know what the intent is when we hear something. And also, for me, I feel like I'm always the biggest schmuck in the room. So, no matter, I might hate Mud or think that First is an idiot, but I'm both of them, and I'm kind of laughing at myself. So, in that regard, I don't think anything should be off limits. It just depends on how it's at least subject matter.
Right.
It's just, you'll know when you read it if that's something worth tossing aside. Or if you can understand that there's some truth and meaning behind it. If it's a greater.
You're very interesting in talking about how you discovered your voice and how that when you're writing what I would call authentically, and that it was sort of, you really wanted to write for a long time, and you'd sit down and there was a lot of rage, or there was an inability to do it. But then somehow you came into like this light and you realized that to be yourself, to hear your voice. And I'd never heard anybody really describe it that way, because I went to Iowa, one of the places that you excoriate. And it shut me up for 10 years, especially being a woman, it's like the time that I went. But there are all these voices in your head, you can't do this, you're going to offend this one, you can't say this. So I was wondering how you come to this place and to write a book like this, and how was it received? because
Right.
you're really out there, you're not holding it back. And that's what makes it such a strong book.
Um, Look, they always ask that question, can writing be taught? I think it can be, but the need can't be, right?
And you've
So
not taught.
no, and
Okay.
and the need, and that need just has to be real. That need has to come from you, and it's not need for fame or money. Certainly not anymore. You're in the wrong business if you want either of those in your writing. Um, but it has to just be something that if you don't do it, something bad is going to happen. And for me, I was so angry and just furious at myself, at life, at God, at my family. And I eventually got really tired of hearing all that rage in my head. And so I went to go see a shrink, and just said, look, I'm 99% of the way towards suicide. I'm fairly certain that I'm going to do this, but I've met a woman and I love her and I agreed to come talk to you about it. But if you take away my anger, I'll kill you, because that's where my writing comes from. So I just, what I wanted him to do was shut the voices off. But if he'd shut the voices off, I felt like I would have nothing. And in effect, what he helped me do was to realize that you could take all of that stuff and it doesn't have to be the song you think it has to be, right? So for me, like, everything was Wagner for the first 25 years of my life. It was just all Wagner. And then you realize, wait, I can write a song, I can live a life, I can write a sentence that's Bach, that's the Beastie Boys. Like, it doesn't have to be, it can be the same exact subject. I can be just as angry. I can express the same exact thing, but it can be light. It can make me laugh. And it was an interesting thing because once I started doing that and I showed people some of the stuff I was writing before and then after, they're like, there was no way they would have guessed that that was the first stuff was me. They're like, no, you're always like this. You're always, taking the piss and having a laugh and saying shit you shouldn't say and making people laugh. And I'm like, I had no idea. In my head, I was just filled with rage all the time. And so I think that's why Kafka appealed to me. I think that's why Vonnegut appealed to me so much, because it was just, or Dick Gregory, it was just like, wow, they're taking these same emotions and they're looking into the blackest of the black and they're laughing. And I was doing the same thing, but crying. And that was my mother's song. My mother is Wagner, in her lightest moods. And I'm just not, and I didn't want to be anymore. So for me, writing this type of thing in this type of way is just, it's just a way for me to get through life and continue to laugh at the darkness. So I can get up and I can rant and rave about identity and this, that, and the other thing, or I can write about a family of cannibal Americans who have to eat their 400-pound mother.
Are there any cannibal Americans, or did you completely invent everything?
I don't know. I haven't heard from any.
You're going to.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to. There's 3 guys outside my house with placards.
Well, I think that the Sturm und Drang of Wagner is like, when you want to be a writer, you want to write like Dostoevsky, right? I mean,
Right. That's what they tell you.
Right? So you don't think it's writing unless you're writing like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy.
Exactly, because it doesn't matter, and it's light, and the truth is, fortunately, I didn't go to Iowa. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't go to college, so no one.
Wow, I didn't know that.
No one fucked with my head, so I didn't. When I met Beckett, when I read Watt or Murphy or Waiting for Godot, I was like, this guy's hilarious. And then I'm like, hey, how come there's this whole other shelf longer than his books, 10 times longer, written about the books he wrote? And you read them all and they're all wrong. They're fucking wrong. He's an Irishman who drank and smoked and had a laugh. And, when it got to his head, he wasn't funny anymore. That's right. And that's just the way, that's just life, So like Heller made me laugh a lot in Catch-22. He made me laugh a lot and Something Happened. Then I found out he was an asshole and it was hard to laugh at it because then suddenly he's not joking anymore.
What about Roth? Did you read Roth?
I never read Roth. I read one, you know what? I read Sabbath Theater first because the name intrigued me, and I looked at the back and it's like a puppeteer or whatever. And I thought, oh, that sounds funny. And it was amazing. It was like pure id. I was like, wow, this guy just went off, didn't care. And so I feel like when I started to read some of the other ones, they felt literary, they felt like he was trying to do something and instead of just being something. And I thought, I think Sabbath Theater ruined me for the rest of them.
I would think so. They're all the other ones are very different. They're
Yeah,
completely different. And he was an asshole too.
right.
I mean, he was and I wanted to say one thing about Vonnegut. My feelings about Vonnegut, why he was a humanist, is he was the no account of in his family. You know, his brother's a famous scientist. He almost gets killed, right? And the only reason he's not killed is because he's a prisoner of war and they put him in a freezer. And he
Right.
comes out and all around him, everything is bombed out. So
Right.
my feeling about his work is like, oh my God, it's all second chance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was the one who was going to add up to nothing.
Well, and not for nothing, but he doesn't write about it, but arguably it's the bigger event in his life. Before all that happened, he comes home on leave and his mother kills himself the day he gets home.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
that,
exactly.
to me, that's like, okay, so if you want to talk about Metamorphosis being about bureaucracy or something, you're out of your fucking mind. When I read Vonnegut, I feel the same way. I
Yeah.
know he's writing about war and anger and all that stuff, and I know he believes it and he means it, but there's clearly other shit going on there that makes him who he is, that makes him, to go back to the whole point about comedy, to make him so desperate to laugh and desperate to believe that people can be better than they are. And that's a beautiful thing. That's taking this horrible, right? Again, because he could have gone Wagner.
Exactly.
But I remember looking, like when I was trying to write and then realizing, wait, fuck this. I don't want to write this serious shit. I don't want 20 pages about a hillside, and I don't want 100 pages about someone just agonizing over death. Like I'm already that way in my life. I don't need this anymore. And noticing for the first time that like all those fucking people I was trying to write, like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, they all look like rabbis. They're all sitting there with big beards and their head on their hands. I'm like, I don't want to hang out with that guy. I just left that guy. That's bad. I don't need that anymore. Show me the funny guy. And then you turn over Breakfast of Champions or whatever, and he's like, and like, okay, I'll read that.
So do you think that comedy gets a bad rap?
It doesn't get any rap. It just gets no respect, but I'm fine with that. I'm you know what was it? The only comedy to win on Oscar was Annie Hall. Like, fine. You know what? The people who know. And if everyone else wants to go, and I remember one time, it was like one of the last times I've stopped watching movies for years and years. And I think one of the reasons was my wife and I went to go see this terrible movie called Breaking the Waves. That was just like 2 hours of the most miserable character's life ever.
Mm-hmm.
She gets beat up, she gets raped, she gets nearly drowned, she gets left. The end. I'm like,
oh God.
I had this moment with Phil Hoffman where we're in a car early one morning, and he had just finished doing Salesman on Broadway, and it took a lot out of him, and that's like
I can imagine.
and he was talking about it, and I just was like, you know what? Fuck Arthur Miller. Fuck Arthur Miller. And he was like, what? It's like, you know what? I wake up feeling that way. I don't need some asshole whispering how bad it is in my ear or putting it up on stage. I'm that down by 7 o'clock in the morning, and I spend the rest of the day trying to pick myself up. So I'm not going to slap down $150 to go watch Death of a Salesman. That's not. I pay for pills that keep me happy.
Right.
I never understood the idea of a downer. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm already down.
That's true. So you don't like Eugene O'Neill?
No. No. But then there are surprisingly, there are people who are funny that we don't associate with funny, or that I completely disagree with, like Chesterton, who's hilarious.
Yeah.
I have nothing in common with him. Or Flannery O'Connor is hilarious. No one knows this, but she had a similar thing. She refused to go to readings, or they didn't actually ask her to because she wasn't famous enough, but she didn't go to colleges to read to students because she'd read, 3 sentences and be on the floor laughing. She couldn't finish reading. And now it's like, and they told her, oh, how do you feel about the term Southern Gothic? She's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Southern?
Right.
It's a funny story. So I think that for me, and I have it tattooed on me, I have it all over the place. To me, comedy has its own wisdom. And if you just trust it and let it go, it will tell you the way, as opposed to, this very heavy intellectual Western sort of philosophical, I can brain my way through this. Maybe you can, Spinoza got close. There are people that I read, but humor and comedy, and and I'm not talking like, rainbow suspenders and clown nose, but has its own intelligence. It just does. It's if you just let it go. And God, when they called Beckett to tell him that he won the Nobel, his wife answered the phone and they said, Sam's won the Nobel Prize. And she said it in French, but her response was, what a catastrophe.
It really was.
Yeah. And
It was.
it's like, what? I'd rather not. You want to give those awards out, go give them out. I'm going to stay here and just, this gets me through life. This teaches me things without me having to, sit at Iowa or anywhere else for 20 years and be told what to think.
And the irony is, Flannery O'Connor is being skewered by identity politics right now.
Oh, is she?
Yes, yes.
Uncle Tough.
They're exactly. And I mean, a lot of the
You
kids
made it. Why? What did she do?
because she supposedly was a racist. Because of the way that she portrayed Black people in her fiction. But she's hilarious and a master of the form. So it's, and you're talking about that in the book as well. I mean, Seventh is a publisher dealing with all of this.
Right. And they burn Huck Finn. And look, it feels really good. It feels really good to be superior to everyone who ever came before on Earth, but we're not. We're just assholes. By the way, 50 years from now, we're all going to get, if this keeps up, we're all going to get skewered. If there is 50 years from now, it's like, we're not shit. This is ridiculous.
What is it like for you being such a New York person to be out in LA?
Well, it's not good, but I realize that it's not about LA. It's people. Like I moved. I didn't move here from Brooklyn or the Lower East Side. I moved from Woodstock, from trees and solitude, for good reasons, for family reasons, for parenting reasons. But I just get a little crazy when there are too many people around. It's hard for me to I need to write and not picture nuclear holocaust all day long, and that's what I do when I'm around people too much.
Are your boys Zooming school, or are they going to school?
They're Zooming. I wouldn't call it school. I'd call it massive headaches by 3 o'clock every day. No sense of anything, not learning anything, and being miserable. But the authority says that's what has to happen. Yeah, it's going to be a defining moment for them in their lives, because
Absolutely.
I think people are not appreciating what they're going through, what children are suffering through this. It's really, really fucked up. And there's suicidality rates are through the roof, and even when they get little kids together, my guys are a little older, but these second graders and third graders who get together just for play dates, like the parents are like, this is just like when they were in kindergarten. They've completely regressed. They're on to me. They're afraid I'm going to leave. They're terrified. And you're just like, I don't know how this makes sense, But,
the other day I was in the bookstore and a woman came in with a baby, and I said, she goes, all she knows people with masks.
Right.
Like when people take the masks off, that's not going to be normal.
Right.
So the absurdity of that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one question because it's almost time for us to finish, which was asked before we began. Barbara wants to know, what's the best compliment you ever got and who gave it to you?
Well, I know it wasn't my mother. I have no idea. My guess would be it was from my wife or kids. but I'd be hard pressed to say which one specifically. I think the fact that they're just still here with me is a huge compliment. But that I don't wake up in the morning and just find everything gone with a note on the door saying "fuck off." That's a huge compliment.
Are your boys old enough to read your work?
Yes, but they don't.
They don't. That's good. You try to keep that as long as you possibly can.
No, I give them it. They just don't want to read it. They're like, my younger one's in Harry Potter. My older one's got too much shit to read for school and can't be bothered. But I think both of them started with Foreskin's Lament and like read the first page where I'm imagining their mother dead behind the seat of the wheel of a car, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's enough. Yeah, they're over with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy now.
And what about Montan? You begin and end the book with Montan.
Yeah, he's a secular saint. I mean, I'm sure they'll come after him for something. I don't know what. And they have. In fact, they have. They always do. But yeah, there's so much about what he said that's funny and true and insightful, and just his approach to life, or to thought, or to writing. I was always amazed that he didn't cross things out. He just added. He didn't want to have this polished, changed diatribe. He just was, there were no essays before him. This didn't exist. So I have this fantastic edition of it. It's beside my bed. It's my sort of secular Old Testament. If God were half the things his believers said he is, he would have written that.
That's great. That's
not the Old fucking Testament. That's
true.
Stephen King.
Anyway, Maris, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, do we have any other questions? We'll bring you back in.
There's
Maris.
one great question.
Okay.
From Ishrat. What sets you apart is fierce flippancy and brutal humor. That would be so God, is the line from Foreskin's Lament that has stayed with me. But despite reason, despite inequalities, despite all that is wrong, God is alive and well everywhere, and jackasses roll all over. Yes, we survive with humor, but it doesn't alter anything. Where do we go?
Here's
Well,
the philosopher listener.
obviously to the polls. No, I'm kidding. I don't know that anything is going to change anything. I wrote a article this past Yom Kippur for the LA Times that said that I think after 6,000 years of us apologizing to God, this year he ought to atone to us. Given Twitter and Trump and COVID and everything else, fuck it, let him say he's sorry. He didn't. Although I will point out that 2 days later, I got an email from a friend saying, hey, you wrote that and Trump's got COVID now. So, you say it's not helping, but maybe it is. I don't know what you can do to change it other than focus on your own space, your own life. And I would suggest, for the record, turning off the internet as much as you can.
I think that's very good.
It's not as bad out there as they're making it seem. It really isn't. It's a lot funnier.
It's a lot. Well, we all need a lot more humor.
Yeah, but life in general is just, this is I'm happy to be able to do this in this time, and technology can be great in some ways, but 50 years from now, we're going to look back at this and it's going to be its own sort of Holocaust.
Yeah, I think so.
Horrible to people. It's turned us into dark shadows of ourselves and the way we relate to people in the outside world. And, I can always tell. I don't read the news. I stay away from it. Even without reading it and without being on I have no internet profile at all. I still hear what I need to hear, right? But I can always tell when I call a friend if they've just been online, because they're miserable.
Yeah.
You can't say why. I don't know why, but they just feel like shit. I'm like, yeah, of course.
That's true. So
I think comedy can help. It can't fix stuff, but there's also a tremendous amount of people making a tremendous amount of money, making you feel that everything needs fixing.
That's very true. It's really true. So I tell everybody, take a Dramamine and buy Mother for dinner.
Hey, I'll tell you this much.
It's not like a movie, so you can't like close your eyes when they start like, taking the human body apart, but you can sort of skip over those parts. It's really a terrific read.
There's much less. My editor cut 90% of that out. What you're
Did
reading.
it really?
Yeah, I'm like, no, I want to cut this bitch up.
I really. But I'm really glad. It took me away from the news except like 5 minutes before I got on, I sent some kind of Trump funny thing to my friend in New Zealand who said, I don't think it's very funny. And then I just wrote back and I said, well, I shouldn't have sent it to you because it is really funny. And that is the only way that I'm surviving right now are through these things.
And now, by the way, you're canceled.
Exactly.
You're gonna get off here and realize, well, we can't even post it because you're hated all over the world.
Exactly.
Well,
All right,
then,
Shalom, thank you so much. Thank you for writing this and just being who you are. And we, for the people out there, support your local independent, get the book from us or get it from your local independent, but we're really happy when you get it from us.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best. And thank you so much for taking the time.
You too. Thanks,
to talk
everyone.
to me today.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure. Thanks,
Thanks.
Maris. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Right.